Okay. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us for, from what I know, this might be the first joint steering committee between the Near Northwest and West steering committee members. Um, so just a quick reminder, this meeting idea came from a couple of our steering committee members back in July, I believe. And really the conversation and this idea came out of when we were discussing draft recommendations. I think someone mentioned, the West steering committee members have been going through this process for a while. So is there an opportunity for us to really just learn from them, learn from each other about, how to best work together, kind of moving forward as we dive into draft recommendations and ultimately creating a draft plan. So just for the knowledge of both West and Near Northwest steering committee members, we just wanted to quickly show you guys the timeline of kind of where both projects are at right now before we get into discussion that Grace will help lead. So I'll just quickly discuss Near Northwest, and Eugene, feel free to chime in and speak to West. But the Near Northwest, as you guys know, for, the Near Northwest steering committee members know, but for West steering committee members to know, we just started our phase 3 process, which is reviewing draft recommendations and kind of key focus topics with the community members. So we just wrapped up phase 2, where we talked about more of the issues in greater detail back in kind of late summer. And now we're kind of going back out into the community this month and early October to continue the discussion. And then, Eugene, do you want to speak to kind of West right now?
Sure. So West, we kicked off our planning process in October of 2019. So not to scare anyone, but once we got started, we were able to hold 2 traditional kickoff meeting in the community. It was pretty well attended. We then had a second community-based meeting where we had our resource fair, and then COVID hit. And so that really added a certain amount of time, about a year actually, to our schedule. But we have managed to work with our steering committee members even through the pandemic, pivoting really quickly to an online, this virtual world that we are all now really quite accustomed to. And I really want to acknowledge and thank the West team and the West steering committee members for really pivoting with us and working through those early months of trying to figure out how we would continue the process while also dealing with a global pandemic. And so our committee was really instrumental in just working with us to get through that time frame. I think we learned a lot during that phase, in that using an online platform allowed us to capture information and material using the chat features and things like that, which actually ended up being a good record for us. And so we continue to work through the steps that you see on the slide here. We had some breakout sessions and some very topic-specific conversations, which maybe we can get into later in the discussion. But now we're at a point where we spent some time working through developing our very first draft, which we shared with the steering committee this summer. From that came a desire to have a small working group to really work through the recommendations in more detail. And our team, the West team, is in the process of finalizing the feedback that we received and making enhancements to the plan, with the intent of returning that to our steering committee in the next week or 2. So pretty excited about what we learned from the initial process, as well as what we learned over the summer, and making reflecting that back in the next draft that we will be putting out for both the steering committee to review, and ideally after that a final public review that we hope will lead us into the adoption phase. So that's about where we are in a nutshell. But if there are questions about that, we can certainly talk about that during the discussion.
Great. Great. Troop, did you have a quick question before I turn it over to Grace to help guide the discussion?
Yeah, actually a question for Eugene. So specifically, Eugene, from the point where you guys began the recommendation conversation to like, how long did you guys work on that before you took it to the public? Because I feel like, at least in ours, the recommendation conversation, I think last month, August was the first one, and it's already at public review with not a lot of time for steering committee to actually look through their draft recommendations, which unlike any of the other phases, I felt like, you know, we spent a lot more time with the steering committee going through those pieces, then we took it to the community. So I'm curious, how much time did the steering committee and the project team spend on draft recommendations before it went to the public?
So really, our plan hasn't yet gone to the public in a full-on process that we typically do. We were going to release our very first full-fledged public review earlier this summer. But the working group and steering committee members really wanted to reconvene and go through the topics and more with more intention, if you will, and had some really good suggestions on how we might enhance and better reflect the priorities of the West neighborhoods. But to answer your question, this beige phase that you see highlighted on the slide right now, we took about a year through that. And the caveat with that is, you know, it was 2020. So we were also dealing with COVID. And we were adjusting our process while in the middle of this planning effort. So I do think that that was a pretty considerable amount of time to spend about a year going through recommendations, because we had to do it all virtually and really didn't have the opportunity to be hands-on in a room together, which is our normal typical process. And then from really most of 2020 into 2021, developing the draft that then we gave to the steering committee earlier this summer. So all in total, it was about a year and a half to go through what I will call the beige and sort of the pink phase that you see here, those two middle phases. But that is extra time that was not initially outlined when we started, because we have been trying to keep with our original 18 to 24 month time frame, which is the time frame that we set up for the NPI process, because we have 19 planning areas to get through. And a typical or old sort of approach to planning would be one neighborhood at a time, spending 2 to possibly 3 years. And doing the math on that, it would take us like 75 years to get through the entire city. And so we had a sort of a mandate, if you will, to really try to get through all 78 statistical neighborhoods in about a 10 to 15 year time frame, which still sounds like a lot of time. But we had to adjust our timing to respond to, you know, a 2-year pandemic.
Thank you.
Okay, Grace, I'll turn it over to you.
So I think, you know, folks from the near Northwest already know me, but my name is Grace Herbison, and I'm a consultant who's been helping with facilitation for the near Northwest plan. So they wanted somebody who was not a planner to help provide unbiased facilitation and to keep discussions and the presentations more in layman's terms. So that's kind of how I was brought into the process. So that's me. But I wanted to start off by just thanking everyone for coming here tonight, and thank the near Northwest steering committee members, particularly Trupti and Ben, who's not here, for having the idea to bring us all together and kind of recognizing the value of learning from others who are a bit further along in the process. And I want to also thank the West Steering Committee for being generous with their time. It sounds like they've been very generous with their time, being involved in the process for quite a while, and then for being here tonight to help us learn from their experience. So the goal for tonight is kind of just that, to learn from the West Area Steering Committee and to capture those lessons learned so the process can continue to improve. So kind of here is going to be on the slide is sort of just like our process for tonight. It's going to be pretty informal, but just kind of give some structure to make sure kind of everybody has room to ask questions. So we'll do introductions, and with that, we'll have a question for everyone to answer. And then we had just some prepared opening questions, and we'll revisit some of the topics that you guys bring up during your introductions. And then we'll kind of just have some free time at the end to address anything else that we have time for. So for the introductions, and I know we have kind of quite a few staff on here, but we can have kind of everybody go through and introduce themselves. So we'll leave this up on the screen for a second, but then I'll put it down so we can all see everybody's faces a little bit better. But if you could just kind of give us your name, and if you're from the near Northwest, if you can share just one thing that you wanted to learn from the West Steering Committee. And then if you're from the West side, from the West Steering Committee, if you could share with us just one thing that you learned from the planning process that you think would be beneficial for the near Northwest members to know. And there was a question in the chat.
Oh, that wasn't a question. I just
awesome.
pasted the questions.
Someone put the
so-
question into the chat too. So if you forget what I had I asked just then, because we're going to close the screen, you can refer to it in the chat. And so I think I'll just kind of go across the screen and who I see first, kind of just on my screen. So I see there's two boxes for Jaime. There's one that just says Jaime, and then one says Jaime Aguilar. Maybe I'll do, are they two separate?
One says Jamie and it's.
Hi, I'm Jaime Aguilar.
Okay.
And then there's Jaime, so their names
Okay,
are
there's a
spelled
Jamie.
different.
Thank you,
Hi.
Councilor.
And that's Councilwoman Torres.
Okay.
Hi, it's Jaime Aguilar. I'm with the West Area Plan, and I totally missed the question for the West Area people. I was hoping to hear everybody else's questions and be able to answer in there, but
I can come back to the question was, what's one thing you learned from the planning process that might be beneficial for the near Northwest Steering Committee to learn? But I can come back to you.
oh no, I'm ready now to budget.
Okay, you're ready.
Yeah, budget your time and use that calendar as much as possible, and try to hold on to your precious time. 3 years is way too long, and it's a lot of calendar, family time, dog time. We don't have a fancy dog park like y'all do at Berkeley, but we make the best of it. Anyway, yes, so calendars.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jaime. And then I'll go to Jamie then, if you would.
Yes, that's me. This is only my second planning steering committee meeting. I was kind of brought in after the fact. And so I guess I'm just really curious as to what did the West Committee Steering Planning do to get the information out to the public? Because I feel like I'm a Northside native, and one of my interests for getting on the committee was to get more information about what's going on in my community. And I've been told as I'm listening to the meetings that surveys were sent out and people went door to door and mailings were done. But I don't recall receiving any of that. And so I feel like I try to stay pretty up on my community. And so if I'm somebody who's trying to actively be informed, and I'm still feeling that I'm receiving a lack of information, what can we do, or what did the West do to get out that information to those community family members that may have no idea that any of this is going on? Because I'm sure there's a fairly large chunk of both communities that really have no idea that any of this is happening.
No, thank you so much, Jamie. Yeah. And so as you guys are sharing this with me, I'm taking notes, and this is what we'll kind of revisit after the opening question. So I captured Jaime's budgeting time and Jamie's kind of how can we better do outreach to make sure we're getting everybody in the communities. So then I'll go to Tim Bowers.
Hi, Tim from Highland on the Near Northwest Steering Committee. I guess my fundamental question for the folks from our West neighborhoods is what information could you have provided to the neighbors sooner that would be helpful? Although it sounds like maybe you haven't talked to the neighbors as much as we have so far, so I'm a little fuzzy on that part.
No, thanks, Tim. Yeah, it sounds like our outreach is an interest of our group. I'll keep note of that. And then Trupti, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, guys. I'm Trupti Suthar. I'm in Sunnyside specifically, and I'm one of the steering committee members on the near Northwest area. And, you know, in terms, I don't know if I have one burning question, but maybe many. You know, I think one is, you know, how did the way the outline was done and the project team and the phases and, you know, how everything was, to me, very prescribed in our conversations, you know, how did that work out for you guys? One of the things that I've noticed is that we always run out of time, you know, constantly. So we never get beneath the surface and we just keep moving on, you know, and especially like with the recommendations, I think we saw them first time, and I don't even think full detail in September, and it's already out to the public. So I don't, but regardless of that, but you know, how did it work out, or what didn't work for you guys that you had to maybe ask the team to do it differently? What didn't work for you guys in the way the project plan and process was laid out for you guys?
Thank you, Trupti. Yeah, I took note of, yeah, so what didn't work about the prescribed process, and maybe what can be improved, and feeling like time was tight and crunched. Great, thanks. Let me make sure. Heidi, would you mind introducing yourself?
Don't mind. I'm Heidi Newhart, and I live in West Colfax, and on the steering committee and the smaller breakout working group sessions that took place. Yeah, and I think that, I think, Trupti, your question is a great one, as is the outreach, which, yeah, those are two really great areas to talk about. I think that the one thing, if I were to recommend or make any recommendations or advice to pass on, in that, you know, that there was a lot of that sort of anxiety around the prescribed process and being moved through a process that didn't feel like sometimes it's hard to tell like what is being contributed, and you know what the steering committee's role is, and whether that's a steering or a focus group kind of situation. One thing that the West team did was that we started meeting separately from the city, probably when we first received the first draft, so that maybe that would have been late spring, maybe. I'm not really sure time sort of. So I'm not sure about that, but it's quite a while. We met, I think probably right around when the first draft came down, and we were meeting, we started meeting together. I think that just having numerous, you know, multiple communities together in one plan. I'm not sure, I know from the city's point of view that that's something that that helps, you know, as Eugene said, with the timeline for the city to be able to move through all the neighborhoods. But I think for the neighborhoods, it's an interesting sort of, you know, paradox to be advocating for your community, but also along with other people who are advocating. And I think for their separate communities, and how do you do this? You know, it was interesting to me to think about, okay, we're thinking about West Colfax, but we're also thinking in our plan, it was 6 neighborhoods altogether. So it's really more of, you know, an individual neighborhood approach, you know, tucked into a regional sort of approach, and if you can think of it that way, because you're thinking about things from a higher level. So it was important for us to meet separately to discuss what our priorities were, how, not just in our neighborhoods, but together collectively, what we wanted to see from a neighborhood plan for all of us, and to talk through what those priorities were and how we wanted to align to advocate for those things individually and together. And I think that made our voice was more cohesive, and we were able to kind of find the language amongst ourselves to be able to do that advocacy, and to be able to get to achieve the things from the plan that we felt were priorities. So I would highly recommend, and we did have a longer process. And we asked for that too. It was very much pandemic driven, but very much something that we asked for. So to have that time to feel like it wasn't as prescribed, and that we could advocate for the things that we wanted to see in our plan in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Heidi. And we can go back into these things kind of later on in the meeting, but thank you for kind of responding for Turkey and sharing that advice. Ben, would you mind introducing yourself? And then I don't know if you heard the question, but it's really for introductions, we're just saying our name and what you hope to learn from the West Area Steering Committee. Like either it could be a question or just if there's a topic that you want to look into more with them.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Ben Chavez. I live 23rd in Clay in Jefferson Park. Just basically I believe, along with Trupti, that we came together with this idea of reaching out to the other steering committee, because we wanted to go ahead and, just get best practices, streamline. How can we go ahead and be most effective, being on the steering committee. So, and then also I just want to say hi, Eugene.
Thank you, Ben. And I see Bill. Bill, would you mind introducing yourself? And did you already see the question, or?
I didn't, but I think I've inferred from what I've heard since I
Okay.
came on. Sorry to be late. My name is Bill Hare. I own a business in Sunnyside at 44th and LePan, and I'm on the steering committee. I'm a late entrance to the steering committee, so I think I've only been to 4 or 5 meetings. I want to second the hello to Eugene. Good to see you, Eugene. My interest in hearing what the earlier planning group steering committee had learned was to really understand if you have any recommendations on how we can best set the table for success. And what I mean by success is this plan is just going to be scratching the surface. And how do we build a framework to take it from here and really have some impact over a period of years based on what's in the plan. That's my biggest concern. Is so often the case with plans. It's not unique to this one. They sit there, and I'm fascinated to hear more about the meetings that were done just among the steering committee, and whether that has had any impact on whether you feel the table is set for success and for follow-up and implementation after the fact. Thanks.
No, thank you, Bill. So it sounds like you're interested in hearing more about the steering committee kind of only meetings, and just kind of how to best set the table for an impactful implementation for the plan. I think I've got all the steering committee members. But
I think did Jasmine get a chance to go?
Jasmine is, I think she's with one of the consultants on the team.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
but I was saying maybe the consultants and people from Councilwoman Sandoval's office could introduce themselves maybe. And if you want to share something you hope to gain from kind of our discussion tonight, you could kind of briefly share that too. That would be great. And I'll kind of just call names too. So I think Sung and Eugene kind of were. Cortland, did you want to introduce yourself? I didn't know if folks have met you from both sides, I imagine, probably.
Yeah, I think so, but yeah, I'm Corlinheiser. I'm also with the city of Denver, and I work on NPI at the program level. And so I plug into all of the active plans, whereas Eugene just focuses on West, Sung just focuses on near Northwest. And I'm just happy to hear the conversation and the ideas that are shared tonight.
And then maybe I'll go to Councilwoman Sandoval's office with Gina.
Hi, everyone. Gina Volpe, one of 2 aides for Councilman Sandoval, just here to listen and be here for the community.
Melissa, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Melissa Horn. I'm Councilwoman Sandoval's other aide. I'm also here just to listen and learn what other people have to say and what occurred on the West Area Plan.
Great. And then Hasmeen.
Hi, everyone. So my role with the Near Northwest Plan was a community outreach specialist, and we for community navigators, and it was based off of a promotora model. Actually, I used to live in right on Dale Court, at the intersection of Dale Court and Federal. And, I used to have promotoras come and knock on my door and tell me to make sure to use my filter and that there were lead pipes. And, I was like, wow, it would be really cool if we had something like this for city plans and something that's kind of complex. But someone mentioned, in the plan, I think it was Jaime, that it kind of felt like we were just doing it on the fly.
Now you're freezing up a little, Hasmeen.
Oh,
The
can you
last
hear me
thing I
now?
heard was doing it on the fly and then get out.
Okay. Sorry, I'm getting some fresh air. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess the biggest thing is, we know that you're never going to reach everybody. Of course, that's the dream, but I'm most curious to hear about what worked well and then what didn't and why. And, even this concept of outreach electronically not being equitable, CCC, our other consultants, WhatsApp worked really well for them. It worked really well for the Latino community, with the caveat that they went to each single neighborhood and they were like, hey, let me tell you what this plan is. Can I add you to my WhatsApp? So it wasn't like there was a human touch first, right? So I know it's difficult, but I'm most excited to learn about those sort of aspects, knowing that, this is new and none of it's perfect. So.
No, thank you for sharing that. So kind of more interest on what was worked and why, and specifically to outreach and maybe how to use technology successfully, kind of and equitably as well. And then Brad, I think you're maybe the last one.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Siegel. I am part of the consultant team to the city. I work with Hasmeen. I'm here to listen, learn, and we still have time to adjust our outreach strategy as we move forward. So appreciate any pearls of wisdom we can get tonight. We appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Brad. So we wanted to start out with just kind of one prepared kind of question just to kind of get the conversation started, but it sounds like we definitely have many different topics areas to get into. So Sung, if you wanted to kind of just pull that question up on the screen. So I think we kind of asked the first question of kind of what else have you learned from, so if there's anything else folks from the West area want to add about what they've learned from the planning process that would be beneficial from the Near Northwest to know, kind of raise your hand, or you can kind of indicate in the chat just so I can kind of make sure I see who all wants to talk. But is there anything else that we kind of missed as we did introductions that you feel like from the West area folks you feel like you would like to share with the Near Northwest?
I do. I'm back on. I can't see myself, but I think I'm back on.
We see
There we
you.
go. Sorry, I'm on my phone. There's a lot of great questions about outreach, and I think that, you know, it's really difficult to reflect upon because we had such great momentum how we started, right? We started off on the neighborhood levels, like introducing, I'm from Villa Park and I'm part of the West Plan. And in Villa Park, we had already started studying, like, what's the architecture, what's the geographics, but then we were being displaced at an incredible level. Houses were going up for sale left and right. And then, however, I remember, you know, in Barnum, and I think it was in West Colfax, like these huge convenings that we had, there were so many people engaged. And we had a preemptive, you know, we prepped our people, for lack of a better term, to start being able to have like conversations and vocabulary, right? But then we got cut off. Like, we lost contact with elders, we lost contact with long-term residents, we lost contact with normal attending neighbors from events. And so how you can adapt what we've learned over the past 2 years as a globe on how to convene, you know, it's up to you to decide, oh, are we reaching the elders that, you know, we usually used to see, or the new people that have come into the neighborhoods. So I just wanted to I wanted to reflect on that, because that's the hardest part. It's still going to be difficult for us to really deploy getting, you know, organic all the way down to every address input. But, you know, we are using the networks to find the organizations and the groups to do so. I don't think that's effective, though. I don't think that's how we intended it. I think we intended it to be more in-person, interactive, with having conversations, not having focus groups and collecting survey data that nobody under 18 submitted to, right? So anyway, just wanted to say that just so I can level set, because I look at my comments, I was like, I don't mean to sound like negative Nancy, but we really had to adapt to something from, I mean, I was in the beginning of the steering committee way back when, you know, before they even started the steering committee, it feels like, when Eugene came to our West Denver Architecture Foundation Villa Park thing. So anyway, I'm taking too much airtime here, but I just wanted to reflect on that outreach and make it equitable.
I mean, you mentioned that you seemed to have good turnout, or maybe you're, you had good turnout early on before kind of COVID derailed.
I mean, we were having questions left and right. We were filling auditoriums. We had all of West High School. The hallways were full.
Do you have thoughts on what made that, how the team was able to get good turnout?
Because our networks were resilient and connected with in person. They weren't relying on links, Teams, electronic communications, Facebook. I mean, you know, like, not everybody was able to, like, I mean, you're talking about interactive stickers, you're talking about boards, you're talking about picture frames to take your picture with the, you know, with just to kind of promote that there is a neighborhood plan happening. We had those little frames, you know, that you can put, you know, and it was just, you were involving. It wasn't from the level of like, okay, here's the city hosting a meeting that you have to go through all these electronic hoops to get to, and hope you have internet, a cell phone, or a computer, or, you know, in some cases, you know, some people were just working all day from home. Sorry, I'm drifting off from
So it sounds like you in person and making it easy for folks to kind of give their input right then and there.
And we were tricking them too. We were just making them have conversations. We weren't like making it so formal. That's what my point I was trying to get across, right? It was coming from, when it's coming from an electronic and the computer and all that shit, that's intimidating. But you're sitting there having organic conversation. It's that real data, that real, you know, expression of desires, you know.
Great.
That's all I was. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, thank you for kind of providing more detail on that. Was there anyone else from the West who wanted to share kind of another lesson learned before we moved on to the other question? Was there anything kind of at the top of your mind?
I mean, I just put in the chat that there's, I mean, plans are, you know, there are many layers and levels, and, you know, people have different interests that they bring. And I know that we never have enough time to delve into these things. So if there are burning things, I'm happy to meet with people after and outside as well to talk about things.
And thank you, Heidi. No, thank you for being so generous with your time. So then maybe I'll just ask kind of the second question was sort of like if you had any advice from, so again, to the West folks, if any advice on how you guys worked well together as a team. I know Heidi already spoke to this topic a little bit by saying you guys made time outside and to meet together, kind of really putting the time in with some of her feedback. But if you had any other thoughts on kind of working well together as a team kind of within the steering committee, and also how you collaborated successfully with the city. People had thoughts on that to share.
Are you asking, who are you asking this?
I'm asking this of the West folks to kind of, well, like, do you have any thoughts or advice for how to work well with the city and how to work well with one another? Like if there were any times where there were challenges and what you were able to do to kind of come to consensus, or you had mentioned like having kind of a plan for advocacy, maybe like talking about how you were able to do that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's all of that. I think that there, from that, I mean, so what we did and what we started to do when we were meeting outside is to really put, and Jaime can, jump in any time to sort of, things, I remember things the way I remember, we all remember things the way we remember from our perspective. So it's always interesting. And the city as well, which is, a big part of this whole process, and allowing us to sort of giving us space to digest the plan and to come at it from a way that made sense for us. I think that it is difficult for the city to have a level of responsibility to move through as many neighborhoods and through a city, and having groups of neighborhoods together. It's probably easier just to, if you have the time, to address each neighborhood as it is. So there's lots of layers, and then you throw in a pandemic, and so it was very challenging, I think, for all of us. But from the community, from the steering committee, for us, it was important to, the language is so different. The city comes with their language because that's how they function, and that's how they keep things, I'm assuming, and the city can certainly speak to why they, their process. But it's when things come at us from anyone in the community, or living in any community or city or municipality, from the way that they're delivered, from a departmental level. And that's not the way people in a community live in a community, or the way that we experience a community. When we walk across the street, we don't identify which pieces are city planning, which pieces are infrastructure and the transportation. We don't see the differences. We just know what it feels like to walk across the street. We know what it feels like to feel pressure, development pressure on our blocks and in our neighborhoods. You know what it's like to not be able to walk out our front door and be able to access fresh food, or be safe on our streets, on our bikes, and with our kids. These are the things that were important to us in the West, and those are the things that when we met together, we actually created a document that we could use as a powerful conversation tool, that talked about the things that, we kind of categorized it in what makes us whole, and what are the false assumptions around what addresses making us whole, so that we could sort of start to parse out what the community valued, and how the way that cities and states, come at these issues that may appear to be solutions, but that don't solve. And we know that density doesn't solve affordable housing, and that's sort of a false assumption that we're trying to use to fit in. So how do we have conversations, real conversations, deep conversations, with not just ourselves in the steering committee, but bringing that to the public, so that we all have the same language, so we're all talking about the same things, so we can all get to the same place. And having those things in the document, so that we can use use it. Another priority we had was having it be a living document so that we could have the things that were important to us in there, so that we could continue to use those points to advocate for our community. And the one main thing that came out of us having our powerful conversation, our conversations document, was to also, in the review of the plan, was the recommendation to focus, to bring quality of life to the front of the plan, and to have that inform all of the other sections, so that we could create something that was more meaningful in the ways that we live in our communities. We live in our communities in more of a systems. We live in a systems. We wanted to see a systems approach in our plan, so that we could understand it better, we could communicate it better, we could take it out to the community better. We'll see if that works. But that's, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Heidi, I'm just trying to be conscious of time. So
of course.
But I also I was curious to hear also from your team, from the perspective of the city as well. So maybe Eugene or Cortland, if you were involved as well, if you had thoughts about what you felt was successful with the collaboration process.
I can lean into that one quickly. One thing that I appreciate about our opportunity to work with the West Steering Committee members is hearing what Heidi just leaned into and spoke about with regard to the quality of life aspect. As planners, or I'll just speak for myself, as a planner, I start with land use because that's what the city, in my understanding, that's what we're responsible for, the planning department in particular. There are aspects to quality of life that are not within our control, because that belongs to Parks and Recreation, and we have the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure that has their components. So, but hearing the importance of that framing, and then having our management team, Cortland is a member of that, really help to listen and embrace that. That is how one of the big changes that we're making in the West Plan is trying to set that framework in response to the values that are important to the city, or to the community rather. So one thing I would like to say very quickly, because I know I want to be cognizant of time. I think that for me as a planner, one thing that I see as a process improvement for myself is connecting the dots. Because we do, or in the West Plan process, we did go through topic by topic, and not everyone, I think, thinks in that way necessarily. And so doing a better job connecting the dots between the different layers and how they make a sum total is something that I think I've learned from this process. And then on the flip side of this, and it's already been spoken to, but I do think it's really important for you all, the Near Northwest Steering Committee members, to take the information from these meetings and share it with your neighbors, whether you do that with city assistance or you do that on your own. One thing that I really hope our West Steering Committee members felt was empowered to share the information, so that more people can be involved. Now, again, we had to deal with 2 years of a pandemic where no one was allowed to get near each other. But seeing that we may be coming out of that, that is one thing I would encourage you all to do, is have those conversations, so that can be a balance between the time that we are trying to balance in order to get through the entire city, and you all feeling as if you are hearing, understanding, and able to share that information. Because I know I initially, when we started, really saw our steering committee members as representatives, but also as individuals to help us get the information out to others. And then, of course, that Jaime said, that momentum that we had at the beginning just really got waylaid. But again, if we're coming out of that on the other side, that is one thing that I would encourage you all to do.
Thank you for sharing that, Eugene. And I know that, as Tripti has said, our time is coming short to the end, but I know there was a lot of interest in outreach, and I know that Jaime spoke a little bit about what he felt kind of contributed to successes they had in terms of like really connecting with people in person and having kind of natural conversations. But did anyone from the West area have anything they wanted to add in terms of like, I know that Tim had asked about like when should you get information out to people, or any advice on how outreach can kind of be more successful in terms of what worked for you guys. Is there anything more you want to share on that topic?
I'll just say that I just hope that what we've learned from, especially the summer of 2020, that we can make things accessible, and that's through language, physical, age, and that's something that I wish we could go back and fix. I wish that I could have a clean heart and said we did our best to make this as equitable as possible with as much participation and justice, language justice, racial justice, environmental justice, like all of those things are I just want to make sure that you can provide that because it was tricky for us to really, and we didn't understand it really. 2020 changed all of us, how we think about these topics. And so we were part of that. And it's really hard to talk about because there's a lot of like shortcomings, nothing's perfect, but we had to get something moving. So, and I put some other stuff in the chat.
Jaime, was there anything in particular you felt like any things that you could have done specifically to make it more equitable, or in terms of language that this team could do that maybe wasn't done on your project?
Yeah, is build it in. And I mentioned something like, if you don't see somebody on the steering committee that could contribute to your conversation and understanding, we had an expert in city planning, we had an expert in social justice, we had an expert in environmental justice that joined on later. So, if there's people that aren't coming, ask them why. And if it's because of language, get an interpreter. If it's about physical ability or technological ability, address it and be part of that. I wish I could have done that, but like most of the time I'm just trying to keep myself alive. We're in different times though. I'm very excited for you guys. I really am.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it sounds like you guys really had to figure a lot out on your responding to what's going on in the world around you. I'm trying to look through the notes and trying to make sure that I know that there were kind of more general questions about best practices. I think we kind of those in terms of like implementation and impact. Are there things that you got for the West area people? Are there things that you feel like you've done in terms of giving your input or in helping to shape the plan that you feel like have been conscious of implementation and impact that it'll have? Because I know that was a question that came up. Was how have you guys thought about how the plan will be implemented and how to ensure that it will be impactful?
I'm going to go out on a whim here because last night City Council approved something that went against the neighborhood plan. So if you go and look back and look at that Cherry Creek rezoning, it went against what the neighborhood plan said. And so what I want to make sure is that we can level set that this community input, this is kind of creeping into needs and desires, which is a whole other category of the city's evaluation process of things. But, look at it a way to say, to make sure it holds its own, because if this is the thing, then did I just waste 3 years that saying blueprint is the official plan and what neighborhood plans say city council can vote against, so just be cognitive of what's happening in these rezonings and how that process happens and what they refer to when they're doing this, because it can be used with you or against you. Ours was used against us because it was made in 1990.
So maybe I think what I hear you saying is that there's the plan, but then also there has to be kind of continued effort as well, like being conscious of what's going on.
It feels like it, yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that.
And maybe the city can jump in too, but I think the implementation, and this kind of speaks to, I think Jamie had this question, or just put it in the chat, like what are we communicating, and what how do you even advocate for a plan, and the implementation to us was something that's a process that the city does last. And that was something that we thought was really important to be incorporated much sooner. And that's sort of one of the places maybe where there's, that there was some tension, only because of where, for us to be able to have a living plan, and what are we communicating and how are we communicating? And if we don't have a plan that we understand, then we can't sell it, right? And if we don't know how it's going to be implemented, we don't know how to keep it alive, and we don't know how to energize people and to get people involved in the process. I think that people really want to see, like, how is something going to be done? And then they can tie it back to what is being said. But if there's when it comes from disparate, like different areas, when it isn't a systems approach, we can't look at everything like, okay, when I cross the street, there's 5 departments involved, and there's, how do we talk about that, and how do we make our plan be something that helps us have those conversations for the next 20 years? And implementation is it, because a developer or the city council or land use committees are just going to go to the land use and the implementation, and maybe the parts that are important to us, like the quality of life and how we move through, how nature and people move through our, how we move through our communities in a real way. Those sections may get skipped over for the pieces that achieve the goals that maybe aren't the priorities for our community.
Heidi, thank you for sharing that. I know we just have a few minutes left. I know Heidi had offered maybe to continue conversations, or so if anyone wanted to put like their email in the chat, you don't have to, obviously, but if just because we're coming to an end here, to continue the conversation with anyone who had questions, you can add that there. And then I think we tried to talk, I know outreach and implementation were big kind of questions that people had. But is there any kind of, like, in this last minute, maybe I think we probably have time for maybe just 1 or maybe 2 questions. Is there anything else that folks from the near Northwest want to kind of ask to the West or wanted clarification on?
There was comments or questions in the chat. Probably we can look at it. There was one that Bill asked, was a lost or lack of participation among steering committee members as high in the West area as it has been in near Northwest? That's an interesting question. I have no idea. And similarly, and this is, having some chat with Cortland as well about the participation. Did the West area in general have better participation from its residents and the community than we did? I can't tell. I have no idea. Forget the fact that we have no standard on what's a good amount and what's insufficient. Just curious, what level of participation in terms of numbers or something that did West have versus near Northwest? Like, how well or not well are we doing in that front, comparatively speaking? That's probably a question for this because you guys.
Yeah, I think that's I'm not sure if Sung or Cortland would have perspective on that. Or Eugene, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we do track numbers and how many people take surveys and those types of things. But there's been 3 years of process in West and a 1.5 years, or not even that yet, for near Northwest. And so we'd have to compare it by phase to see. And so, like, very often we'll do that like at the end and like give an overall picture for a planning process. But we have with West one that's almost at the end, and near Northwest that's more like halfway through. So we'd have to do it more by phase. But I think we've been doing a much better job of presenting a lot of that information with our end of phase engagement summaries, which is something that we've started doing only with our most recent plans. So we did one for West that was kind of like a catch up of several phases of outreach and engagement, but we've been doing it individually for each phase as we go through near Northwest. So we'll keep doing that, and it'll be easier probably to compare from one plan to another in terms of how many people are being reached.
And what about the steering committee itself, I guess? I guess Bill noticed that there is less, active people or participation or active participation from the steering committee members in near Northwest. I'm curious whether, I don't even know where that's coming from, maybe just, observational. But how was it for the West area as far as, did you have, people showing up, kind of versus we're not? I don't know. I don't know whether our steering committee is not, doing what they should be doing.
I can speak to that to some degree, and of course others from the West can speak up as well. Two things. I think our initial start was really strong, even with the pivot to an online venue, continued to have folks show up and participate. I think what tends to happen is once a committee member feels as if their topic has been addressed, they may not necessarily feel so inclined to continue. And then, of course, life changed for so many people during the last 2 years. And I think that people moved, people, had new jobs and what have you. So we have had some attrition, but there are folks like Jaime and Heidi and others who maybe aren't here tonight that have stuck with us through the 3-year process. And I just applaud them for that, because that is a lot of time, which is why we are wanting to kind of wrap things up for West. And also, I would want to reiterate what Jaime mentioned earlier. If you see that people are not there or not present, I think it's up to you all to reach out to them if you know them and to ask them what's going on and why. I would like to say that is another role of a steering committee member. It's challenging for us as city staff to chase people down, if you will. But you all are there together. You are a lens into this process. And I think it behooves you to support one another, meet with one another, and then find out if people are falling off, why.
Yeah. And we as staff monitor attendance too. I mean, if someone hasn't been showing up for 2 or 3 times in a row, I typically send them an email or just give them a call just to check in, because Eugene says life happens and life happens outside of this plan process. So to be at least human about that, but at least, touch base with people. So we do kind of monitor attendance on a monthly basis and, just make sure people are engaged, or if they're not engaged, make sure they have the resources or to feel like they can be more involved too as well.
So I'll go ahead and just make it very brief, because I know we're at the end. Comment, since I put the question in the chat. I do think that the steering committee, the construction of it should be re-examined. I know that there are at least 2 or 3 or 4 people just in the Sunnyside neighborhood that would have had tons of energy and contributed quite a bit to the steering committee. But because the steering committee is kept to 25 people, they didn't get to participate. I was lucky enough to get brought in midway through the process, but there are others out there that were frustrated with not being included, that haven't been invited in. And I think you might want to try to come up with a more flexible process that maybe starts with a much larger number and is prepared for the fall off that's going to happen. But at least because I know the committee is created in part to bring people in that aren't normally very active. But unfortunately, you're increasing your likelihood that those same people aren't going to become engaged in the committee. So you've got that, and then you've got the desire to have people that are going to really dig in and help. And you've got to meet both of those objectives. And I think a group of 25 doesn't quite do it. So.
No, thanks. Thank you for sharing that feedback, Bill. I do want to be respectful of people's time. And we're a little past 7 now, but I do want to thank everyone for taking the time for being here tonight. And thank you for the Near Northwest for having the idea for us to meet. And I hope that you feel a little, feel like you have a little more information to help inform what we do as we move forward. I'm sure there's other questions that'll come up as we move through. And I want to thank the West area for being here and giving even more of your time, which sounds like you've given a lot to this process and to help the kind of overall planning process improve and for us to get better as we move forward. So thank you all for everything.
I'm just before we end, I'm wondering if folks would be open to having another one of these right before kind of phase 4 picks up. Once the draft recommendations, I know with East Colfax, there was a really big surge of response once there were actually things to react to. And I wonder if that was the case for West. And we don't have time necessarily to answer that question now because we are over time. But if we could potentially meet at another time to sort of reflect on a smaller portion of a phase, really focusing on those authentic conversations that are informal and running more with that. So just planting a seed. Only if you're providing chubbies. Okay, that sounds like a plan.
That's fair.
That's fair. Next time we'll feed everyone.
No, I think, well, it seems like there is some interest in that. So I don't know what next steps would be for that, but maybe it's something we could kind of discuss internally and present kind of what that idea might look like.
Yeah, we as a team and staff can discuss what that might look like later down the line when we start preparing for the next phase, like Yasmin was saying.
Great. Nice. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. And I hope you enjoy kind of the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Eugene. Thank you all. Thanks, Ben, Eugene, Heidi.